Welcome back. It's great to see everyone. Hope some of you got some rest over the night. I'm sorry that we cut your sleep short for those who are waking up early in the morning. Hopefully some who it's late at night got some rest as well, and hopefully we'll get you to bed having had a productive discussion. And I know the team's excited to start going through this draft ISA a little bit more. Our goal is to at least get through section 7 tonight, but let's try to beat expectations a little bit. Guy, you think we could do that?
Sure. I have I believe in the board, so we will be able to do that.
Okay. We ready to go?
Think so.
Okay.
Thanks for that intro.
Oh, I accidentally, instead of muting me, Kai, I muted you. So I'm already off to a bad start.
That's good. Yeah, I think within, as you said, they're ready to start going into the core of the standard itself, discussing the different parts. As I said this morning, for some of you, or evening or late night for others, when we go through the different parts, if you have significant or fatal issues that you have identified based on the mapping on the corresponding part, please raise them in when we go through the different parts, as there may not be time to go through detailed part by part on the mapping itself. So I think by that, looking at the slide in front of you, this is just reiterating what we have in the issues paper. If you remember back in discussion in March, we received or the board expressed confusion around a little bit the content of what was part 3 at that point, audit evidence. It did have parts of it was more overarching relating to audit evidence, but it did also include some matters relating to providing audit evidence on and doing procedures later on in an audit. So what we tried to do is clarify a bit in now what is part 2. So it really has the conceptual parts of audit evidence. With that, we also include the overarching documentation requirements and parts of what was in the previous part 3 has moved. Some of it is now in part 1, fundamental concepts, and part of it is in part 7, responding to assessed risk. So it more follows closely the direction what we heard from the board. I think in addition to the movement that we've done, I think we heard on the comments we've received so far, some questions on parts of the or some of the ordering of these, some of the parts here. We'll come back to a little bit later when we get to the different parts. So if we go to the next slide, specifically on part 1, we have received some comments on or comments from the board that we will look at. Some of that is also related to public sector entities, so we need to take a close look to see what we have there now, if it is in the right place, and whether it's what needs to be in or more needs to go in, or some parts of it will go out. Other than that, there are also a lot of, as I said, detailed comments that we will talk through with the task force tomorrow and on Wednesday. So I think with that intro, Tom, I'll hand back to you for comments on part 1.
Okay, and this is part 1 on the general principles, I think. Just fundamental concepts of general principles. Take comments. Josephine, thank you for leading us off.
So I kick off. Thank you ever so much. Again, I can see that the task force has been incredibly responsive to a number of comments I raised previously, so I really appreciate that. Really not very much in this part at all. Just wanted to comment on 1.5.1. I'm still not quite sure, and it might be because I'm not being able to see for the wood for the trees now, but I'm still not quite sure why that section isn't just folded into the risk assessment and response section. And maybe just maybe a question more than anything why it's there, because I think we could probably fold it in later. And then I have some other little editorials. On 1.7.1, in A, we talk about information about the entity's related parties, including circumstances involving a related party with dominant influence. In the standards, that's really related to fraud risk factors, and that's the context within that requirement, or the context that's needed for that requirement to be understood, in my view. So I wondered if the task force could have another look at that and maybe just expand it to think about those fraud risk factors. And then the others are other comments which I've already sent to you. So it's just those two for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Sachika.
Good morning from Tokyo, everybody. I have actually two comments with regard to part one. The first one is paragraph 133, which states that if an objective cannot be achieved by performing the required procedure, the auditor is required to modify the auditor's opinion or withdraw from the engagement. However, I think in some cases, it should meet stakeholders' expectations if the auditor consider a transition to full ISA audit before modifying the opinion or withdrawing, when by making transition to the full ISA, auditor would obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So I think some linkage to this point is helpful. And my second comment is on paragraph 134. It states that the auditor shall determine whether additional procedures are necessary to achieve the objectives. But I think it gives an impression that paragraph 134 is inconsistent with the previous paragraph 133, which requires the auditor to modify the auditor's opinion or withdraw from the engagement if an objective in a part cannot be achieved by performing the procedures required by the part and other procedure considered necessary in the circumstances. I think paragraph 134 is not needed and therefore should be removed. And also with regard to essentially explanatory material in 134, I think this EEM comes from paragraph A73 of ISA 200. And paragraph A73 of ISA 200 is an application material for paragraph 21 of ISA 200, which comes down to the paragraph 132 in the ISA for LCE. So I think this EM or paragraph 134 should be moved below the paragraph 132. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachika. Fernando.
Thanks, Tom, and hello, everyone. Just a quick comment for the team for consideration in point 1.2. And it's the part that talks about ISQM2. I do not disagree, actually, including the reference here. It's just that actually in practice, we see higher risk engagements and more complex engagements actually being assigned with an EQR. So we may hear comments about the applicability of ISQM2 combined with this ISA for LC as part of the exposure period of comments, and we may just need to deal that going forward. Just a point for consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Kai-Uwe?
Thanks, Tom. Good evening. I have a comment to paragraph 1.8. I believe it is not in the public interest to not include the requirement from ISA 260, paragraph 11, that the auditor needs to determine the appropriate person within the entity's governance structure with whom to communicate. The experience in Germany has shown that it is actually more difficult to determine with whom to communicate for SEs compared to more formalized governance structures for PIs because of the less formal structures So, for example, the situation with minority owners not part of management and partnerships and limited liability companies, etc., without a formal board structure and family-owned businesses. The last two sentences in the following application material, and in particular the last sentence, shows that the requirement is needed. Thanks.
Thanks, Ty. Yosh?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. And I have just two comments about the ISRC structure, part 1, paragraph 110, regarding the statement of automated tools and the techniques in the paragraph 1.10. And similarly, in paragraph 2.5, general documentation part, there is also description of ATT. The ATT is considered as a non-authoritative guidance in other ISAs, and it seems inconsistent for the ATT to be listed alone in this standard. The second one is regarding the EEM, as stated in paragraph 110 and subtitled of P.13 at page 7, Farm Quality Management. The EEM, which is provided alone without any requirement, is considered as an explanation of the content of the subsection, but the standard is getting longer and the necessity to be stated is not sufficient, I think. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Yosh. Imran, I did not remove my shirt that was your twin to insult you. It is just too hot in DC right now. So it wasn't a sign that I've left your team.
As long as you have the memo about what color we have to wear tomorrow. So I was telling someone about the marathon nature of this week and describing how hard it was to go to bed and wake up, and then reflecting on how hard this must be for Kai Botten and the team that's supporting him to have 2 marathon sessions in one day is really phenomenal. But someone reminded me of this quotation from a South African author, Tom, and it says, we will all wake up tomorrow morning and all the hard work will indeed look like it was an overnight success. So I've got a couple of comments on this part, please. The first, and several of them relate to deletions. So you may want to perk up if you could save you a page of text here. And the first is about the need for paragraph 1.1 on the effective date. So I've been trying to draw an equivalent between this effective date paragraph and the effective date paragraphs we typically have in standalone ISAs. And we have effective dates in those ISAs because we have a suite, and at a particular day, one element of the suite is going to change, and we introduce that into the suite of standards. And I was wondering the need for the date within what is a standalone standard. And as one tries to roll this forward to our discussion about a stable platform and the need to make amendments in future, how will subsequent changes to the standard work with a date for the entire standard already embedded into the text? And I think it may pose problems that will go beyond the ability of a conforming amendment to fix. Because unlike the ISAs, this is not the effective date of just one subject matter, but rather applies to the entire set. And we may have to, through the parliamentarians, find a way to deal with the effective date outside of this paragraph in some other way. The second one relates to the comment that Fernando introduced about the EQR provision in 1.2.1. I would describe how I heard the feedback from SMP practitioners as being significant pushback about this. I don't think they objected to the idea that we had some text here, which was an entirely agreeable text, but that the introduction of EQR suggested that the type of engagement that we were contemplating here was something that was rather complex, that needed an EQR. Because the scoping for an EQR provides for EQR on listeds, EQRs for pies, and EQRs for those entities where there's a significant risk. but that should be the opposite of the type of entities that would be that the LCE standard would be applicable to. And so that entity cannot be an LCE on which an EQR is required. So I don't know whether it's as clear cut as I've got it described to me in the way I put it to you, but certainly there's a sense that our references to EQR push us in that direction. The third one is 1.3.3 and 1.3.4. I have a comment similar to my Japanese friend Sachiko's. Mine relates to how the same issue that Sachiko raised is described in the gray block that follows 1.3.4, which says that one would perform other procedures judged by the auditor to be necessary in the circumstances. My understanding is that we will continue to then push to use the LCE standard, even when the LCE standard is no longer appropriate for the circumstances of that engagement, and when we should be in fact migrating to the ISAs. The next comment is on 1.8.1. More than one person who read the description of the governance framework described in 1.8.1 suggested that the application material here really overdid the description of governance that one would expect to find in the type of LCE entities we're talking about. And in fact, the description here in some respects described a rather sophisticated organization. And in fact, if you mapped the gray block in 1.8.1 to A110, there were actual contradictions between how those factors and characteristics are described in A110 and how this gray block describes governance. Of a similar vein, 1.10 may also be describing elements for the auditor that may contradict the descriptions in A10. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm receiving lots of helpful feedback from the board to the team on drafting. Yet, if there's something that really deserves board discussion, where there seems a major fundamental point of disagreement, I'll pause. But I'm going to allow this tour de table to continue, and we'll come back to the issues at the end. Next is Isabel.
Yes, thank you. My point also relates to 1.10 on AT&T, automated tools and techniques. And based on the discussions we had in France with SMP auditing non-complex entity, they agree that AT&T should be dealt with in this standard, but their feeling and their perception is that there is too much on that. And more specifically in 1.10, it's okay with data analytics, but then we introduce robotic process automation, artificial intelligence technique, and currently it's not what you should expect to find in an audit of an LCE. And there's a lot of AT&T further in the document. So maybe we could remove some of it. We don't need so much AT&T in an audit of LCE currently. But I agree that it should stay in the standard. And for me, it's not an issue, the fact that we don't have it in a requirement, because here it's in the gray area, which is guidance. So I'm fine with that. But we have to find the right balance, not to create a great expectation that it's almost mandatory for that kind of entities. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn.
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everybody. 3 points from me. I read 1.3.2a and 1.34 as being the same thing. So if they're not the same thing, that should be clarified how they're different. And if they are the same thing, one should be deleted. Kai, thank you very much for noting the public sector matters. I won't go through those here. And I agree on 110, in particular, the words vast volumes of data. seem to me to be inconsistent with the definition of an LCE. So I think that section either needs to be changed or probably deleted about artificial intelligence in particular. Thanks very much, Tom.
Thank you. Len.
Yeah, I think Lynn just said the same thing I was going to say about the ATT. I'm not sure it belongs in part one. Part one deal with the general principle concept. So I'm not. I feel the whole section is kind of out of place, and also it's very no additional language to explain. You know, the why AT&T belongs there. It's just a blue box showing different type of technology. So I would suggest taking that away and perhaps incorporate into implementation guidance. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, thank you. Just one point to raise in sections 1.8.6 and 1.8.7. They talk about the auditor's responsibility when they identify fraud to report to management and those charged with governance. But there's nothing that that we noted in this standard about reporting to authorities outside the entity if fraud is discovered, such as we see in ISA 240. And that seems like an omission that that shouldn't be there. So we think it would be in the public interest to have fraud reported to authorities if it's the situation warrants that.
Thank you. Okay. A number, as I said earlier, of comments that are helpful to draft. And Josephine, are you coming back on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I had said this point along in my editorials, and I was wondering whether it's 1.6.3 could actually be very easily expanded to include fraud, and then it also covers reporting to appropriate authority, because we had a similar point as Michael's as well. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Get back to this number of useful feedback points. I didn't see issues of fundamental contention with the thrust of the document, but also suggestions on how to improve it. But a number of them to be picked up. And Kai and Bev, I turn it back to you for your preliminary reactions, some of which you may have already picked up in terms of the offline comments you received.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the board for providing the comments. I see that they are in line with very much what we've seen coming through in the written comments. So that's helpful to us. And also given the ability to start thinking a bit ahead. So a lot of what is coming through here, we will start discussing, and think some of these are very helpful suggestions and things we will see how we can address. I think on the automated tools and techniques, we added this part back on, or automated tools and techniques we added in the separate standard on request from the board, but we may have gone a bit far and included a bit too much. So we'll see where it should be and how much should be there. So maybe we can reduce some of the content that is there, taking out some of the matters that have been brought up here. I think other than that, as I said, Tom, it's more or less individual comments that we need to deal with in coming back with a revised draft. So again, thanks for the good comments being provided, and it is something that we will look at going into the turning the document. So anything specific you thought that we needed to bring back? No.
Anything that the board members felt like we need a further discussion on? Josephine?
I'm sorry. I wondered whether we might go back to ISQM2, because there are slightly differing views on whether or not we should be included something in the standard here. I mean, personally, I was okay with it because it's up to the firm to determine whether they would like to include an EQCR and an engagement. And in response to risk, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily the type of entity. It could be something to do with the fact it's a new engagement. It could be anything. And whilst I recognise that we tend to think of the EQCR in that more complex space, I don't think we should necessarily scope it out of a possibility here. So I just wanted to understand what the task force thought about those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Bev?
So I think at one point we didn't have ISQM2 in here, but there are circumstances, even although these are less complex entities and public sector comes to mind, sometimes there may be sort of a type of entity that has EQRs, and there may still be LCEs, and that's why it's included, although there are very few references to ISQM2 for that reason. Thanks.
Wendy?
Okay, so I was going to bring this up in the next section. Initially, I also had the same thought, don't need ISQM2. But then as I was going through the standard, I got comfortable that it should be there because there certainly could be circumstances that would suggest that an independent reviewer is needed. And so where I picked it up is in the blue box above 2.5.2. So I won't bring it up again there, which has some confusing discussion about a partner doing the job all on his own, his or her own. Which I then wrote a note to say, well, then certainly I would suggest that the firm have a policy if that is the case, which that's a different subject, that there should be an independent reviewer. Thank you.
Just say I was sort of the same thing. I would not think that normally, in the vast majority of cases, that an entity that would demand an EQ engagement quality review would be scoped into the standard, but for the reasons said, I thought that was a compelling assessment, and so I got more comfortable with it as well. Is the board happy with the explanation provided? Okay, and thank you, Josephine, for bringing us back to that issue. That's an example for others. That's why I paused here at the end. So if people wouldn't feel like we need to be brought back to an issue, please do. And I think we're ready for part two. Okay.
Thank you. If we flip the slide, yeah, I think you can flip one more even. We already discussed the restructuring, and now that part two has more of the overarching concepts that are coming up in the front, and has also changed the name, so now it's audit evidence and documentation. We have received a couple of comments to suggest or to ask whether all documentation requirements that we have spread out should be in a separate part altogether. We will discuss that a bit with the task force, but it has been while developing the standard, one of our principles in a way has been trying to give the documentation requirements with the specific requirement itself. So, but we will discuss that. And I think also some comments on some content that have been brought in, especially around scalability parts that has been taken from the ISA. We need to look a bit further on to see if they actually work as intended or not. So I think other than that, Tom, I don't have any specific remarks to make on part two. So back to you for comments on part two on audit evidence and documentation.
I got a quick remark on by message, only that Imran had to jump off, but he has no comments on part two. So you have his support. Any other comments on part two? Ada.
Yes, Tom, thank you. My comment primarily relates to the box under 2.5.2. And I appreciate that this is text that is taken from the application material, but here it provides an example where the audit documentation for the audit of a less complex entity is generally less than for the audit of a more complex entity. And I think principally, I struggle a little bit with comparing an audit under this standard with an audit under a different set of standards in this example. Because this standard is supposed to be on its own. So I'm not sure that here we can make that comparison. And in addition to that, this particular sentence, it gave me the feeling that you can document less for the same type of issue. And I don't think that's the meaning of this sentence. And the circumstances will be different such that less documentation may be required. It gave us the impression that for the same circumstance you would document less under this standard, and I don't think that's the intent of what the task force of the point that the task force was trying to convey. And I think there's another example in here where there's a comparison between what an LCE audit does versus the full ISAs, and I struggle to see how that is in the right spot in this standard. Thank you.
And your solution that would address it would be really to focus on proportionality to the nature and circumstances of the entity rather than a comparison of. I think that's I see Bev and Kai nodding their heads. That should be a pretty simple fix, and I think it's a good fix for it. If it's a standalone standard and that's an operating principle, and we want to convey that this is of high quality in and of itself, that makes a lot of sense to me. People agree with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. And that's sort of where you were driving us, right? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Isabel?
Same topic, documentation, but different perspective. The perception of people used to audit LCE was that we had too much on documentation in this standard. The part that is coming from ISA 230 is properly reflected, but there was a feeling that we don't need all the specific documentation requirements that are coming from other ISAs, because a lot of circumstances where you need this additional documentation requirement will not be present in an audit of a less complex entity. So they would favor maybe, instead of having all these specific documentation requirements and having in diverse places the documentation, maybe more having some external guidance, helping documentation of an audit of LCE, maybe with example, so something much more practical than having all these sets of documentation. Thank you.
I think Tom dropped off the call. Are there any other comments on part 2?
Guy, I don't see any other hands. I see Thomas dropped us a message. He says his internet froze, so I'm sure he will dial back just now. So I think let's just see. I didn't see any additional hands for anything on part 2, except the comment that was made by Isabel.
Yeah, I think on Ido's comment, that was partly what I alluded to, that we had brought some scalability pieces from the ISAs in, and that they may not work in the context. So the suggestions that came up here, I think, are good suggestions of changes that we will look to. We will also look into a bit on Isabel's comment there, but I think starting to removing a lot of the content that we have in a way had in for quite a while, I think at this point could become dangerous to start if we lose requirements that are necessary. So we will look at some of it to see if there are things that can be streamlined, but it's something we'll discuss further with the task force tomorrow.
Yeah. I think, Kai, we should maybe just ask the board. I think Isabel has raised a fundamental point about documentation, and that maybe the general requirements is enough and we don't need the specific requirements. Are there any other board members that either support that or would want to express a different view around that point? Because I do think it's important for the task force in terms of deliberating this tomorrow. Isabel, I see you've come back in, so I'll give you first opportunity to respond.
Yes, thank you. Just to further explain what I meant, often people perceive the auditing standard as being complex, but when we ask them what is so complex with the auditing standards, they complain not about the procedures that we have to do, but they complain about the documentation. So my expectation was that we could scale down the documentation requirements proportional to the complexity of the entity. Thank you.
Okay, so with the clarification that it would be an adjustment for proportionality, but I see I've got a few other hands here as well. So Ada?
Yes, thank you, Willie. I struggle a little bit with that comment. So I think that the documentation requirements as they sit in here seem appropriate. And when something is not applicable, you don't have to document it. And that goes for this standard just as any other standard. So I would struggle to see that we start striking stuff out from the documentation point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. Josephine?
Yeah, thank you, Willie. I'm totally in agreement with Ada. Nothing else to add to Ada's point. Thank you. Thank you, Ada.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Oh, I've got a few more hands up as well. So let's go to Sashika.
Thank you. I just point out that I also heard very similar view from practitioners in Japan from S&P side with Isabel. They also argue that, their key concerns on full ISA is, documentation areas. And at this time of the moment, I think perhaps we cannot, eliminate a lot of requirements from the draft, but maybe we need to address this issue anyhow, perhaps not in the, either for LCE, but have some, implementation guidelines with regard to how to document, how to make documentation for LCE audit. Maybe that would be other way to address the issue, but I really support the issue and concern that Isabel raised, and I think we need to address that in somehow. That's all from me, thank you.
Thank you, Sashiko. Imran?
Really, thank you, without detracting from the points there.
Sorry, Imran, we can't hear you, Imran. Okay, so I'll come back to Imran. So Diane?
Yeah, so I guess I respect the different views on this. I just think at the end of the day, we need to stay true to ISO 230 and just reaffirm that the documentation is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor with no previous experience on the audit to understand the nature, timing, extent of the procedures performed. So I wouldn't want to lose sight of, at the end of the day, there is a minimum documentation requirement that needs to be there. So that's my only comment that I would make on the subject. Thanks.
Thank you, Diane. Lynn?
Yeah, thank you, Willie. I'm in the same place that Dan just articulated. I think at the end of the day, we need to stay fair to 230. The principle is there. And when I was going through the part two, I don't really see anything there. I think that they're principle based. I think that's, there are certain things that if you doesn't apply, I think Edo articulated very well. It doesn't apply, you don't have to document them. So I think what we have here is actually probably in the right place. I don't think there's anything to water it down. I think at the end of the day, documentation has to be robust. I think I do know the challenges to small practitioners, but principle 230 is still the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. I see there's two more hands up, Sue and Roger, and Imran, then I'll come back to you. So Sue.
Thanks, Billy, and I'm in the same place as others. I just wanted to say I think what's there is sufficiently high level, but the key point is that the documentation, as Diane expressed very well, has got to be sufficient to meet the various requirements. So I support what's there at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger.
Just a point that we will be picking up documentation as part of complexity under the CUS project. We'll be looking at frequently asked questions in that particular regard, with the points of remaining true to 230, and we can try and pick up an element of less complex in that particular area as well. So there will be some other areas going out on documentation.
Thank you, Roger. I have also made a note about that one, so thank you for that. Lynn, I see your hand is up. Let me just quickly go back to Imran and see if we can hear Imran now.
Yes, quick comment. I support what is in the documentation at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks. And Lynn. Lynn, I think you're on mute still.
Thanks, Billy. I support what's in the documentation section at present. I just think that there is a desire among a number of practitioners to reduce the amount of documentation, and that's not what we're going to do. We are going to require still robust and full documentation, and I would expect a number of practitioners to come back and say, we thought you were going to reduce the amount of documentation. That's not reality, but I think that is the expectation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. I think if I can summarize, I think we've received a strong steer from the board that, although there's acknowledgement of the difficulties that I experienced, there's a strong steer that the documentation requirements, there's a built-in proportionality already to the documentation requirements that we see in the draft standard, and that we should try and stay relatively close to the documentation requirements in ISO 230 as well as the individual requirements throughout the parts. But I do think Sashiko also made the point that there might be another mechanism that we can maybe use to also provide some support to practitioners. And as Roger said, we know that the documentation is also a specific piece that the CUS group is looking at. So Kai, I'm just going to hand back to you for any summary or response.
Thank you. I think we got good direction or clear direction on documentation there. That we're supportive of what we have in. I think as a lot of people explained as well, our intention was never to reduce the amount of necessary documentation in here, and though we did see on the Counsel or on the discussion paper that quite a lot of comments were also related to documentation, and as Sachiko and others pointed out, it may be the case that is not fully dealt with in the standard itself, but it's something that can be done on the outside on additional guidance and so on the outside. So thanks for that.
Okay. So Kai, I think with that we can move on to the next part.
Thank you. I see also Tom connecting back. So hopefully has luck to get back in. I think if we flip the slide, we
Sorry
can,
about that. Slight bandwidth issue maybe in the house. Did we cover all of part 2? We're on part 3 right now.
We just
I was just going to introduce part 3.
Okay.
So we're on part 3. I note that we're more efficient without me on the call.
So on part 3, the engagement quality management, as you see, changes have been made to address the concern from the board in the previous round. In a couple of places, we have received comments that we seem to go a bit further than the requirement in the ISA itself. So that the auditor has to go further. We will look a bit more at that. I think also a couple of places there has been highlighted where there are fundamental aspects of a requirement that are missing and might be needed to be added back in. And also a couple of board members have raised a few requirements where they think we should give some further considerations to include back in. An example of that is cooperation between the engagement partner and the EQ reviewer, for example, and the EQ reviewer we've already been discussing a bit, so we need to look into that a bit more. One of the other questions as well, more on structure and flow, is that we received some comments that say maybe this engagement quality management should come after acceptance continuance, so that the order should flip between part 3 and part 4. So that's an area where we need some further direction as well, I think, from the board. All of these comments we'll look at in the turnaround document. So I think with that, Tom, back to you to comments on engagement quality management.
Okay. Engagement quality management. Josephine.
Thank you. Just to say thank you to the task force for being so responsive again to my comments on 220. And personally, I'll just go with the flow of the board on whether 3 should come after the terms of the engagement. I really don't mind. I liked it where it was. I thought it made sense, but I'm happy either way. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn?
I had a slightly different view. I thought part 3 should come before part 2, given the overarching need for quality. It's not a fatal flaw, but that's my preference. Thank you.
Thank you. Sachita?
Thank you. With regard to the order, I don't have big preference, but I have one comment on a specific paragraph, which is 3 to 14. Paragraph 3 to 14 states the engaging partner shall determine that an engagement quality review has been performed in accordance with the firm's related policies or procedures. And I think this requirement goes beyond the requirement in either 220 because I think this requirement comes from paragraph 36 of either 220 revised, and that requires the engagement partner to determine that an engagement quality reviewer has been appointed, and it does not require the engagement partner to determine that EQR has been performed in accordance with the firm's policy and procedure. So I think this paragraph should be revised to become consistent with either 220 paragraph 36. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see, a lot of conviction on ordering. Kai, and you got a couple of other comments on this section. How would you like me to proceed?
Yeah, I think we can, I see there are no clear view from the board that the order should change. We will discuss it a bit with the task force tomorrow, but I see that there are no strong feelings as such. As a good general direction, I think we can work based on what we have currently.
Okay, great.
And I think also, Sachiko, some of the comments you raised there is, as I alluded to, some areas where we might have gone a bit further than what's in the ISA requirement, and we will look at those. So thanks. We'll try to address those in the turnaround document coming to you later in the week.
Okay. I see no other comments on part 3. Should we move on?
We can do so. We can flip to the next slide. So similar slide, just the number changed. Now we're on part 4, acceptance or continuance on audit engagement and initial audit engagements. I think one of the key areas in here, and what we have added lately, is to have the requirement for the engagement partner to assess whether or not you can use the ISA for LCE on this engagement. We have received comments, though, that it might be onerous requirement and difficult to do practically at this point in the audit. So we need to look at that. It's an explicit requirement with a related documentation requirement as well, but we need to see how we can clarify it so it's clear what's the background for that, or what's the intent of it and what you need to do. So we will look at some rewording with the task force there. We also will look into the terms of engagement to see whether or not the reference to ISA for LCE could be made more explicit. And also around initial audit engagements, there may be a couple of requirements where we need to add some more content in there. So I think other than that, no specific remarks from me in the beginning. So back to you for comments on part 4, acceptance, continuance of audit engagement and initial audit engagements.
Okay, part 4. Eric.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to echo support for what Kai just said around the 4.2.1 and that requirement in terms of helping the practitioner understand what the intent is and what the work effort is in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I have a comment to paragraph 4.1 and there 4.1.1 B little double I. On the different financial reporting frameworks, there are different requirements with respect to adjustments regarding prior period financial statements and opening balances. Some financial reporting frameworks require retrospective application. Others require or permit prospective application with disclosures. That is why paragraph 3 little b of ISA 510 was written the way it was. By seeking to shorten the objective in this way, the objective no longer references to the requirements of the applicable financial reporting framework, the accounting for such adjustments and disclosures, which is particularly important for prospective application. Consequently, little double I should revert to the wording in little b of paragraph 3 in ISA 510. That's all.
Thank you. Josephine.
Thank you. I was just going to say, Kai, thank you. I support some of the suggestions that you made in terms of perhaps bringing in the idea of the clarity that the audit is being performed under the LCE standard and making sure that's baked into the terms of engagement. And also, I do still feel that some essential materials needed here where the audit's not statutory audit and management is leading the discussion on what standard should be used and therefore what's the rationale for using this standard, etc. I I do also see that there are some overlaps between the documentation requirements as well. There was quite a bit of ISO 210 that was not included in the standard, and I can see the rationale behind that. Was paragraph 18, 19, and 20 that talks about the different financial reporting standards established. I wondered if you just have another look at that and see if maybe we just need a little bit more, given this is a standalone standard and that information won't be anywhere else. Or alternatively, we check that as being information that we put in implementation material, because obviously that's a really important part of the standard and of the audit, is understanding the framework. And so I wondered if a little bit more could be done there, and then the rest are really just suggestions and editorials. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yosh?
Thank you, Tom. I have just one comment, paragraph 4.8.3. When the engagement partner becomes aware of information that leads them to decide not to accept or continue an engagement because it does not meet the applicable conditions of the ISO LCE after accepting or continuing engagement, the engagement response is very important among his responsibilities. So it should be reflected in the ISO LCE, like the ISO 220 paragraph 24, I think. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Imran?
Yes, let's open for the audio. Two comments on section 4. The first is just to pick up on a comment I made in the earlier opening session on 4.1, and that is the need to create a link between 4.2.1 and part A of the standard. While still focused on 4.2.1, I am missing the link to 4.2.1 within 4.5, and that is agreeing the terms of the audit engagement. I would have imagined that it comes back to the primary question: who is responsible for agreeing that the engagement needs to be done under this standard? And I would have expected that it would be amongst those provisions listed somewhere between 4.5.1 to 4.5.6. I appreciate that 4.5.7 is a different issue. So just to recap, my what I'm looking for is a link for paragraph 4.2.1 forward to section A and backward to what should go into the engagement letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Okay. That's the comment, the hands that were raised. Kai, a number of suggestions.
Yeah.
Reaction, it seems like a few things for the task force to consider.
Yeah, I think some details, some suggestions of some additional requirements and details to be brought back in. And I think from what I heard on being raised now, it's along the lines of what we have identified through the written comments and already started to think about how we can address in the turn document. So that's good. No other specific issues or things to be brought back on part 4 from our side.
Anyone feel like we need further discussion on any part of part 4, or are you happy with the task force taking on your comments? Okay, I think you got the go ahead to move to the planning section.
Thanks. So if we flip the slide again, then we're moving on to part 5, which is planning. No common themes really coming through. There are various comments that on different parts of things we need to consider in the next round. And maybe the area there are some consistency around using work of an auditor's expert. That's one area that's been identified by multiples where we may need to look at some more. Other than that, no specific areas that we've identified. Other individual comments, but no major themes that I would bring up front. So back to you, Tom, for comments on part 5, planning.
Okay, planning. Comments on planning. Isabel.
Yes, minor point, but we raise the point that planning is coming before risk assessment, while normally you would plan your audit when you have already identified the risk and determined the expertise that you need. So I answered that it's already like this in the ISAs, that planning is coming before risk assessment. But as we have more flexibility here, maybe it's a matter to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you. We were, some of the comments that I sent in did deal with the experts. So just for purposes of sharing those, one of them was in 5.2.8. I think you could reinstate what exists today in the ISA, allowing you to consider, first of all, the significance of the expert's work relative to the auditor's purposes, and then you can evaluate the competency and capability. So I think you may have lost the scalability that exists in the ISA that you can put back into 5.2.8. And then the other one dealing with expert is in 5.2.11, little a. I think that first comment should also include a really important one, which is the continued carryover from ISA 620 to evaluate the objectivity of that external expert, which is, again, important to understand their interests, their relationships, and so on, so that you can determine whether you can use their work and rely on it. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Kaiui.
Tom, thanks. I have a comment to paragraph 5.2.11. My first comment refers to little a. When an expert is an external expert, such an expert is not subject to firm quality management. Consequently, additional inquiries are necessary regarding the interests and relationships that may create a threat to the external expert's objectivity. Hence, the requirement in the second sentence of paragraph 9 for external expert in this respect needs to be incorporated here. My second comment refers to little c in the same paragraph. There's always a need for the expert to observe confidentiality requirements. Consequently, in line with the requirement in ISA 620, the words "whether there is" need to be deleted. Thanks, that's all.
Thank you, Kai. Ada.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I had exactly the same comments as Diane had, so I won't repeat those. But I was wondering, in respect of materiality, we dive into materiality in 5.3 and 5.3.1 with a little bit of EEM, and this is where this is an area where I think, well, is this really all that we should provide? So what is materiality is not explained in here, and if somebody just picks up this standard, I wonder whether that's sufficient. And let's say as a minimum, I would think that 320 paragraph 2 would be a very useful inclusion in here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine.
Thank you. Apologies. So I also agree that and had exactly the same points as Diane and Kai as well. And I do support the suggestion made by Ado that we seem a little light on what materiality is, and actually 320 paragraph 2 is probably a good idea to bring some of that in. The only other comment I wanted to make was in the essential material underneath the heading determining whether to use the work of an auditor's expert. I've sent in a couple of editorial points on this. I think what's missing here is that this is in the context that the auditor still performs procedures on the expert's work, and the way it's written may imply that it's sufficient to just take that work and use that work immediately as audit evidence, and that's not how 620 is made up, and that's certainly not what is expected anyway. So I've suggested an editorial there which just clarifies that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Some consistency on our points here, which is helpful to the task force. Imran.
Yes, thank you. So Edu made the comment about materiality, whether this is really all, and he made a suggestion about what more could be considered there. I've written to the task force suggesting that there were specific materiality considerations that could be expanded upon in the gray block to 531 that would be relevant to an audit of an LCE. And what that would be that in an entity with a less complex structure, control environment, or transactions, this may equate to the client being of low risk, and therefore it would have an impact on the determination of materiality. And this needs to be taken account in how percentages and other things are used in determining materiality for LCEs. So that's the first comment. The second one, though, is when we stand back and think about what is being asked of the practitioner to undertake in Section 5 on planning, we recognize, for example, in 522, that many of the things that are listed in 522 are only being performed at this point in the audit, at point 5 in the audit. Yet, Part A of the standard surmises that we already know these things in making the determination that's in paragraph 810 around whether this is an LCE audit or not. So for example, in 522, if we're thinking about the factors that are significant in directing the engagement team's efforts, one of those factors may be about the complexity of the IT system. We're only expected to get a good understanding of it here in part 5, yet somehow at the engagement acceptance stage, we would have already considered it in determining that an LCE standard is appropriate. And I see this as a fundamental disconnect between when the standard applies and when the planning is being done for the engagement that we're talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Imran. That's all the hands there. You got some, as said, consistent themes for the task force to consider in their deliberations. Kai, any reactions?
No, I think as you highlighted, there are consistency around two main themes coming through experts and on materiality. So we will look specifically to those two areas and the comments received. I think also we will look, as I said on the previous section, we'll look at the requirement that we have in part 4 on the use of the ISA, which I think is related to your comment on 5.2.2 there, Imran. So we'll look a bit into that to see how that can be brought through a bit clearer.
Anyone like to raise anything else on the planning section? Happy to allow the task force to enter those comments. Okay, I think we could go on to the next section. Depending on how quickly this goes through, we may take a break after this one, just because the next couple of sections are going to be probably after this the heaviest loads. People may need a glass of water before get themselves ready for it. So let's go through section part 6 now.
Thank you, Tom. Part 6, risk identification and assessment. Again, a number of individual comments, some of the common things coming through on related parties, if what we have there is sufficient or not. So we'll look at that. I think also a few comments on pieces from ISA 540 that may be missing. So we need to reconsider and maybe see whether more needs to be added. All the same also on service organization. I think that's the main themes that we've picked up. As I said, there are a number of individual comments that we will look into on the turn document, but those three is probably the main themes and the bigger items that we've seen coming through. So back to you, Tom, for comments on the risk identification and assessment.
Okay, really into the heart of the ISA for LCEs now. So
Thanks. We've sent a number of suggestions across. I think in this area there were a few pieces from ISA 315 that have been cut out that I think are probably important to be able to meet the requirements appropriately. And also just suggestions on in the area of internal controls particularly, and things like IT general controls. These are areas that crop up in practice. And I don't know whether the task force has views about whether there's help either here or in the supplementary material around things like the understanding the extent of documentation. As I say, they are areas that consistently arise in practice. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue. Taiwe.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I have a comment to paragraph 6.3.7, and there my comment refers to the word evaluate. Given the definition of the word evaluate in the IAASB glossary of terms, that verb would involve an identification and analysis of the relevant issues, including performing additional audit procedure as necessary to come to a conclusion on matter. While such analysis and the performance of additional procedures to conclude on a matter may be needed when the control environment is complex, when a control environment is simple, an auditor need to perform an analysis of the issues or perform additional audit procedures, but may be able to reach a conclusion of the control environment based upon the evidence obtained without further analysis. In that case, consider is the appropriate word. Then my next comment refers to 6.314. First to little a, if auditors are able and choose to use a substantive approach to significant risk, then in an LCE environment in which it is so much easier to identify and assess risk of material misstatement because the risks are simpler and often the controls less well designed, it does not make sense to require that the design effectiveness and implementation of such controls be evaluated. I believe this requirement is not needed in an LCE requirement and can be deleted. Then to one comment to little d in the same paragraph. This requirement is superfluous if the auditor believes that the auditor needs to do more to meet the objectives or of identifying risk of material misstatement at the assertion level, then an auditor would need to do more. In any case, this is going to be unlikely in an LCE environment, in which it is much easier to identify risk of material misstatement. And then I have a comment to little f, also in the same paragraph. It refers to the term and transaction, not only related party relationships, but also related party transactions need to be identified, accounted for, and disclosed. So the words and transactions need to be inserted prior to in accordance with. So let me see. No, I think that's all. Thanks.
And I'm just going to note this for the record. In some instances, members have sent these detailed drafting comments in. So it's really as much to share it for other board members to give visibility and to stimulate discussion. But if the task force is not catching it or does not have the record of it, raise your hand and it will pause for a second, okay? Yosh.
Thank you, Chair. I have just one comment about the paragraph 6.5.9. There's a requirement 6.5.9 of the risk assessment to evaluate whether LCIs can continue to be applied at the time of the risk assessment. In addition, it is necessary to continue to monitor whether the conditions for the application of ISA LCE are maintained at all stages of the audit engagement. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel?
Yes, my point relates to the articulation of 6.314, 15, and 16. And we had the feeling that we are requiring too much for an audit of an LCE, and the way the requirements of ISA 315 have been redrafted here, and the scope of the procedures may not be needed in an audit of an LCE. And more than that, on 6.3.16, I think we had a complete misunderstanding at the start of the sentence when we read for whose risks arising from the use of IT. We did not realize it was the risks identified in the previous paragraph, and we thought it was all the risks arising from the use of IT, and then it's disproportionate. So I think we should make a clear reference to, instead of whose, replacing that with 6.3 from point 15, so that we clearly understand that it's what we mean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ida?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Maybe quickly react to Isabel's and Kai Uwe's point, and I understand the comments in respect of controls and to the extent and the questions around whether it's applicable or not. And I would remind the board of my concerns that I think the authority at the moment could be read too wide, and also for instances and companies and entities that do have these controls and where it would be appropriate to apply these procedures around the controls. So I think they're in the current setting, they are more than appropriate. Let's see, there's a couple of other comments I have, and this is where, so 315 is not an easy standard to get to, and there's some important concepts, not only from 315, but also broader, where I think it's going to be difficult for an auditor just reading the requirement to really understand what he or she should be doing. So if I read 6.3.1 out of the blue, I would struggle to understand what is meant here. It introduces inherent risk factors, it introduces assertions, and I think we should help the practitioner a little bit in that area. Kai Morten already mentioned a couple of points in respect of 540, so I'm not going to bring them up, but for example, the concept of significant loss of transactions, account balances, and disclosures is something that I also think could benefit by a bit more application material. Let me just scroll down. Oh yeah, and then in the box under 6.3.10, there's again a comparison between an LCE and an ISA audit, which I think is inappropriate. So that's in the box on page 747. Yeah, I take it that Kai Morten has taken our comments in respect of 540, but not all the requirements are met in all instances, and I think that is more or less. Let me just scroll down. I think that is more or less it. Yes, that's about it. And I appreciate Josh's comment as well in respect of the evaluation, and it is. I know it's in different phases of the audit. And we haven't talked about transition, and we did talk about transition. It's something that will be discussed further in the explanatory memorandum. But if at certain stages an auditor needs to switch, and the further along the process you get, the harder it will be to switch back. And there is an inherent risk that the practitioner may not want to for various reasons, and that hurdle could become quite hard. But I think others have pointed it out as well. So thank you very much.
I think partly your response to Isabel and Kai reflects the balance that the task force has grappled with, particularly with any matters of 315, where the tendency has been to keep in requirements, as I remember, or not. Is that fair statement, Kai? Kai Morton?
Yeah, and I think as we expressed earlier, as it's a new standard that has not even yet come into effect, it was difficult to remove some of the big concepts that have been brought in there. So that's on balance. I think you see we get views in different directions, so maybe we're in the middle position here.
You're looking for the Goldilocks effect for us, but I think that's really sort of what we face, and I assume we're going to get, if it were in an era more, we'll probably get comments on this particular point as the ED of whether we really are in the Goldilocks position or not. But I'm sure we'll hear on it.
I think also, Bev, you might want to come in on the 315 pieces that have been commented here.
Just two things quickly. There's still two hands, but on the consider versus evaluate. So we did actually try to introduce the term consider in the March board paper for the very reason that Kai Overt set out. And I think on balance, the board thought that because it's a new standard, it hasn't even been implemented yet. We don't even know what the implementation issues are around it. It's probably unwise at this point to change any of the sort of the verbs around what's required, and that's why we've gone back to the evaluate. Perhaps what we can do for some of them is perhaps put a little bit of material in there just to sort of soften it a little bit, as to sort of that it's more sort of light touch rather than the full-on evaluate. We know that we've had lots of questions on that in 315 itself, and it's sort of obtaining an understanding section. So it's a little bit different to when you're trying to conclude. So there's a slightly different work effort, and we had tried a different verb, but it didn't work. And that's why we've gone back to the language in 315. And then just to Edo's point about some of these concepts that get introduced around for example, the relevant assertions, their inherent risk factors, etc. Those are all defined terms, and there will be, so obviously in the electronic one, it'll be fine because you'll have the sort of little hover box that you can see. But again, at one point we did have some application or EAM and trying to explain what some of these were, and because they define terms, we took it out to try and sort of not have duplication in. So we'll have to just have a little bit more of a chat at the task force to see how much we include for that. Thanks.
Just want to reflect. I see Jim and Wendy still have their hands up, so I'm not forgetting you, but I just want to talk about sort of the major structural point here, in Kai, Uwe, and Isabel. At least I want to get a sense that you understand, or you're comfortable with at least the tensions that the task force is managing here, and this was not where a fatal flaw for you going forward. So, any sense, the reaction? Yeah, pass. Isabel?
Yes, I confirm it's not a fatal flaw. I think it will be interesting to hear at the time of the exposure draft what people feel, and they will have matured on the implementation of ISA 315, so they may also have a clearer mind at that time. Thank you.
And we would expect to elicit some comment on it. You know, if it's on in, then you probably risk not doing it or raising some of the concerns that it'll raise as well. Kai, you have anything to add? Kai, sorry.
No, not to add. Thanks, Tom. And this is not a fatal flaw for me. Thanks.
Okay, I'm glad. I just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to hear this issue.
Thanks.
Okay, Jim.
Thanks, Tom. And I just wanted to, well, first thank the task force at 6.36, where they discuss the public sector angle. Often wearing my public sector hat, that's advocated for, and appreciate that. One question I do have is many times in the section refers to, in the public sector, there are additional responsibilities related to internal control. And if those responsibilities go as far as attest of controls, that would still be okay under this LCE. I just want to confirm that.
Any quick reaction to Jim's question there?
I think that as we currently discussed earlier today, what we have included in the standard right now is around audit of the financial statement. So we haven't done in addition, but we need to consider a bit more. And I think that's the link more to ISE 3000 that you're referring to there, Jim, and how that could be done. I haven't discussed it at length, so we probably need to have a quick reaction to that, unless Bev has the answer on the fly.
Yeah. And I certainly appreciate the point that you have and the fact you were thinking about that public sector environment, but also just it often does lead to an in-test type of engagement or 3000. Thank you.
I'll just come in here because I think, and I think it's Diane that did raise some comments on part 7. When we get to part 7, I'm sure she'll raise them, where she doesn't think we've got enough on the controls. So for those that actually do have to test controls, say in the public sector for a different reason, you'd still be able to use them in this audit. But we just need to see how far we go. So maybe we may need to just limit what we have, but perhaps have a little bit more than what is there now.
Hi, thank you. Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. I said earlier today, I tried to be holistic, and then I fell into a trap in this section and went through the mapping and started adding things in from 315. And then I stopped myself and said, this can't be right. And quite frankly, I went to Appendix 2. And I just wanted to chime in here that I think that was really helpful to stand back and look at that section in the context of LCE and whether or not I thought all of the relevant and important requirements were in Part 6. So I just wanted to add that on Appendix 2 here.
Thank you. Kai, that's the last of the hands. You want to address any issues we have not responded to yet?
I do think we have discussed or addressed the issues that have come through more or less throughout this. As I said, there are a number of comments that have come through in the written comments that we will look into further when turning the document. So nothing specific that I would like to address at this point.
And would anyone else like to raise any comments on Part 7 that they feel require further board discussion? Okay, I think we're on good pace right now. We need a break. I say we take a 14-minute break. We'll reconvene at 1:45 the hour. Thank you all for great comments. Again, if we're not hitting a topic that you feel needs further exposure and discussion, please ping me throughout the meeting. Hopefully my internet won't go out again. And I appreciate the conversation for now. I'll see you at 6:45 my time. Thank you. We'll start in a minute. Okay. Great if we could all come back. Recognizing it's getting late at night for many of you. So we'll try to get at least through part 8. We'll gauge where we are. If people could use the rest and turn up, come back to this tomorrow, that'd be fine. But if people feel so motivated, we'll continue. But again, I'm conscious it's getting late at night for many of you. Kai, turn it back to you.
Thank you, Tom. I think then, as the slide here says, we're now moving on to part 7, responding to assessed risk of material misstatement. As I explained earlier, this part has gotten some new content that has been moved over from the old part 3 on audit evidence, parts that where there has been moved in here. I think from the comments we received so far and on the discussion just before the break, control testing, we will look into to see whether we need to add some more in there. That it seems that are a bit weak on the control testing, and we need to balance that with the views also of the need of how much needs to be included in the LCE standard. So we'll look at that with the task force as well, and also, as we said earlier, some more closer look around the ISO 540 requirements that may need to be brought back in, or how we deal with some of that is some of the themes that we've seen being highlighted from the comments that we received so far. So I think, Tom, that's introduction remarks to part 7. So back to you for comments on responding to assessed risk of material misstatements.
Thanks, Kai. Volunteers? Diane.
Hello. So as I warned, most of my comments, the ones that I felt strongly about, were items that I thought would impact reasonable assurance. So Kai and Bev saw my comments regarding test of controls. I do think this is a particular area where what is in here right now seems, well, to me, is light compared to the requirements that are in ISA 330 and so on. And I do think this is a big deviation, because at the end of the day, the things that we're missing, like testing controls throughout the period, could impact your ability to provide reasonable assurance. So we did send along several comments. In particular, test of controls was a big area that I'd ask folks to go back and take a look at. Additionally, I think in external confirmations, ISA 505 was actually excluded from the mapping document. Being good auditors, we did a completeness check. And so there are some elements, 505 paragraph 7, which is also really important, because this talks about the procedural aspect of doing confirmations and the fact that the auditor shall maintain control over it. Again, I do think that's an important concept that should be brought over. If it's not there, that could impact the auditor's ability to provide reasonable assurance. So that external confirmation guidance I thought was particularly important as well. And we provided those comments. And then the other one that I did also feel strongly about was 7.3.24. And there's a key concept from ISA 505, which is missing, which is when the auditor has exceptions, they need to then investigate those to determine if they're indicative of a misstatement. Again, could affect reasonable assurance, so that's why that one becomes important. But as I mentioned, we did provide these details over, and those are the big ones. I'm just looking to see. we did have quite a few comments in this section. Oh, the other one that's pretty important is 7.4.13, which deals with estimates. And what we're talking about there is the concept of consistency. So consistency in the assumptions year over year. Are there changes in those significant assumptions? And also the methods as well as the assumptions. Have there been changes year over year? So that's in 7.4.13B, 2i, some tightening up of that, which I think would be helpful. And maybe one more on inventory, 7.4.14, that whole section, there's some guidance in ISA 501, paragraph 8, which deals when inventory is under the custody and control of a third party. Now, people may say, gee, I don't think that's really relevant to an LCE, but many times an LCE actually does outsource their inventory because they don't have the wherewithal or the resources available in-house. So I would just be cautious about assuming that that's a non-event relative to LCEs. And I'll stop at that. Oh, one more. I promise this last one, which is litigation and claims. I think there's some key elements also in 501 and other aspects that could be brought into relative to the process of sending out confirmations and then evaluating those, or when the client prohibits you from confirming with external counsel. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Sachiko.
Thank you, Tom. I have two comments on this section. The first one is on paragraph 741. I think essentially explanatory material of this paragraph may give the impression that responsibility for the going concern assessment required by ISA for LCE is actually heavier than those in full ISA. Paragraph 741 EM states, even if management of LCE doesn't prepare detailed assessment of the entity's ability to continue as a going concern, the auditor still needs to evaluate management assessment. But on the other hand, paragraph A9 of ISA 570 states, in some circumstances, the auditor can conclude whether management use of going concern basis of accounting is appropriate without detailed analysis by management. In the audit of LCE, I think it is often the case that management does not prepare detailed assessment. I think therefore the paragraph 741 EM should be revised to become consistent with paragraph A9 of ISA 570. I think it's a kind of nuance, but maybe you can take a look at that. And other point I have is with regard to control testing. According to the mapping document, paragraph 13 of ISA 330, which addresses using audit evidence obtained in previous audit with regard to internal control testing, is not included in the ISA for LCE. And as described in the mapping document, I agree that LCE audit usually has less focus on the internal control testing, but in some cases, the auditor may plan to perform a test of control. And if there is no description about using audit evidence obtained in previous audit, I think it gives the impression that LCE auditor may need to perform the test of control every year. So I think paragraph 13 of ISA 330 should be also included in ISA for LCE so that the auditor can use audit evidence obtained in previous audit. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Josephine.
Thank you. Diane's made my work here very easy. I had very similar comments on the operating effectiveness of controls and testing that. And so I've handed over quite a few comments on that. And in respect to 7.3.24, I had the same comment on 7.4.13 and 1.4. And 7.4.16, we absolutely agree with that comment that you can actually seek third-party help when you're actually storing up your inventory. And so would like to see that coming back in. In respect to, I was going to make another point on the going concern paragraph 7.4.1 that Sachiko raised. I came at it slightly differently in that I wasn't particularly concerned with the requirement, but I felt that we deleted some guidance from the March version, which actually talked about other ways that you might get comfortable when evaluating that assessment if it's not detailed. So maybe look at what Sachiko suggests and what we've suggested and maybe come to some compromise on that. The only other point I wanted to raise was I'm just going right back to the start again is in the objective, and maybe I haven't understood, but I think the objective in 7.1.1D has reduced the responsibility of the auditor because 250 requires the auditor to respond appropriately to identified or suspected non-compliance with laws and regulations, and I think we've got a limiter here which is actually reducing the work effort, but I'm not quite sure why one wouldn't respond to suspected as well as actual instances in an LCE audit. So I thought perhaps we need to have another look at that. But all the comments I've sent along anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Ida?
Yes, thank you, Tom. A few comments in respect of 7.3.17b. In reading that sentence, I couldn't get towards the same language that 330 paragraph 23 says. So consider the task force to have a look at that. Let's see, I have a couple of comments here and there on 540. Diane raised one. I've have a couple of further suggestions which have passed along to the task force. I think my key issue here is the use of the service organization, and it is very limited on it, and it was described also in the mapping document why. But I would argue that particularly in an environment where small or less complex entities will use standardized software packages, with all of those moving to the cloud, those typically, at least that's what I see from our environment here, they use a software or an accounting system that is run as software as a service in the cloud, and that often does come with either a 3402 type comfort. And as such, I think we need to be careful not to leave the auditors of the LCE that are in that situation out to hang dry, because I think it is something that probably is more common than maybe anticipated. Let's see, and other than that, 762 significant deficiencies. It's not where significant deficiencies are in writing. I think we need to stick to the same language as standard, where all significant deficiencies should be in writing. And and then another point on accounting, yes, but I've passed those along. So thank you very much, Tom. That's it.
Thank you. Kai Uwe?
Tom, thanks. I have a couple of comments. The first one refers to 7.3.10 little a. Missing seems to me to be the content of the requirement in paragraph 11 of ISA 330, that controls need to be tested for the time or throughout the time period for which the auditor intends to rely on controls, because we need to avoid situations in which auditors only test a part of the time period for which they intend to rely on controls. My next comment refers to 7.4. I believe that the section ongoing concern needs to include the content of the requirement in paragraph 26 of ISA 570 on significant delays in the approval of the financial statements, because it is LCE audits, not audits of PIs, that are usually performed late in the year because their filing deadlines, if any, are so much later, sometimes just before the end of the year. Then my next comment refers to 7.413 little b. The verb consider here appears to be inappropriate because one cannot consider whether calculations are mathematically accurate or assumptions and data are appropriate without having evaluated them. In this case, the verb evaluate is more appropriate. And then my next comment belongs to the same paragraph, to little b, to little double I. It seems to me that the requirement paragraph in ISA 540 paragraph 24 little c and little d relating to whether the assumptions are consistent with others and whether management has the intention and ability to carry out specific courses of action needs to be incorporated here, as this is important in LCE audits too. And then my last comment refers to 7.4.16. I believe it would be in the public interest to include the content of the requirements in paragraphs 10 and 11 of paragraph 501 in relation to a letter of inquiry directed towards external legal counsel. Many LCEs are subject to legal claims, and most are not large enough to have in-house legal counsels, as suggested in little a. These requirements are not onerous. It is essential for legal claims. Tom, I think that's all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you. That's the last hand raised. A number of comments I think the task force has heard, but suggestions on improving this section as well. Kai, any reactions? I know you've had the opportunity to consider some of these comments even in advance of this meeting.
Yeah, as I said, we will continue to look into some of them. And as I highlighted, I picked out control testing and estimates as areas we need to look further into. I think also from the comments that we gotten here, service organization and going concerns, we have some suggestions on as well. So in addition to other written comments, I don't think there's anything specific that I would like to comment on right now, but I think very helpful suggestions have both been raised on the call, but also again, thanks very much to all the board members that have sent comments and also in their comments indicating ways that the issues could be solved itself. So that's very helpful for us and going in this week. So thanks for that. If there is no other specific comments or questions on the content of part 7, I don't have anything other to comment on right now.
Anyone like to raise anything else on part 7? Okay, I think we can move to part 8.
Thank you, Tom. And I think now we're exceeding the expectations that were set in the first half of the meeting where were going. So thanks to the board for the good work and staying concise on the comments being raised. So then comments on part 8 concluding. We have received a number of individual comments in a lot of the areas of things that similar to the discussions we had earlier, that concept or requirements that should be considered to brought back in, some essential material that could be considered being brought in. I don't have any specific things to highlight up front, so I think we should just hand back to you, Tom, for comments on part 8 concluding.
As we're concluding on this, we'll take on concluding. So questions on this section? Josephine.
Thank you. So just going through again, I've sent a few comments in, so I appreciate the task force looking at those. Some to raise. In 8.2.1, I think the running on of the sentence here doesn't make it clear that when the auditor is performing work on misstatements and asks management to correct all misstatements accumulated, it then follows on that if at the auditor's request management has examined a class of transactions and so forth, the auditor performs additional procedures. But as we've written it here, or as it's written here, losing that point that at the auditor's request, it implies that anything that management has done in this area, the auditor has to perform additional procedures. And so it should be obvious that it's only those that are at the auditor's request, but I think it'd be useful to actually just clarify that point there, to not scope in everything here. In terms of, sorry, bear with me. In terms of 8.5.1, the task force have removed a reference here that the evaluation as to whether the assessment of risk of material misstatement remains appropriate to occur before the conclusion of the audit. So essentially, I think 8.5.1 should really be in section 7, because you gathered all this evidence, you performed the procedures, gathered all this evidence, and then you have to stand back and say, do I now need to do more? How are the risks right? Do I need to do more work? And I feel that that's not really concluding. I feel that's still just rolling through the work in part 7. And so just have a think about that, and maybe other board members might have a different view, but I just felt like it wasn't in the right section here, unfortunately. The only other, I mean, I've got a couple of points, as I say, that I've sent through. The only other point is that there are some summaries in 8.6.1, which mean that we've sort of strayed away from what the requirement means. And in that respect, I think perhaps go back and look at the comments and see where those requirements perhaps ought to just be aligned properly with the requirements in the standard. And inevitably, I will raise 8.7.1 again. I do think we have changed this requirement, and I am worried about it, because what we've said here is that now the practitioner has to determine, the audit partner has to determine whether, in addition to A and B, whether they have actually achieved overall responsibility for managing and achieving, sorry, it's late, apologies, overall responsibility for managing and achieving quality on the audit engagement. They have to evaluate that now or determine that as a separate point. But in ISO 220, how they get to that evaluation is through A and B. And so we're asking on an LCE audit, the practitioner to do something above and beyond what we're asking in a normal ISO audit here. So I would like the task force to have another look at that. Thank you. And as I say, I've just sent some other comments on, but those are the 3 I just wanted to raise for now. Thank you.
I saw Kai nodding his head, taking note of that last point. So, Imran.
Thank you. In respect of section 8, both my comments revolve around paragraph 851. Josephine has already spoken to this, and Josephine's proposal was to move 8.5.1 to part 7 and she did ask for some reaction to that. I would support that. However, in addition to it, I think that there's two further considerations here, and it relates to the gray block in 851. The first bit would be to make the first large part of that block match 4.83. And 4.83 is that requirement that says that the auditor must document changes, if any, to their determination of the use of the ISA for LCEs if further information comes to the auditor's attention. And it would seem like 851 is slightly, is materially disconnected from that requirement in 4.8.3. I think one other way to fix this is the last sentence within the gray block. In my mind, must be a requirement. This can't be an optional consideration about whether there is other information that changes the auditor's determination about the appropriateness of the use of the ISAs for LCE for the audit. I can't imagine under what circumstances that is merely application material, but shouldn't always be considered as part of the process of evaluation and conclusion. So a strong call that that be converted into a requirement, please. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any other thoughts on this 8.5.1 section? I don't know if Bev or Kai want to react to it at all, but if you need some guidance on going into your deliberations, I'm happy to pause here on it.
I think on a couple of these areas, we have also in the task force been discussing where the right place of them is. I think we can discuss that a bit further in the task force as well, but I am not having a strong reaction to it right now.
Okay. Anyone else feel strongly about that on the board? Okay, the task force will take it back. Now I've heard two views that are consistent on the point. Don't be surprised if it shifts, but with other matters. Okay, next, Kaiue.
Thanks, Tom. I have a couple of comments. The first one refers to 8.2.1. It seems to me that the requirement from paragraph 9 of ISA 450 is missing. This requirement is in the public interest because the reasons for management not correcting a misstatement that is not material may be an indication that it is in fact material. I note that paragraph 9.8.5 relates to misstatements of the other information, so the requirement there does not address this issue. My next comment refers to 8.4. It's a general comment on the section of subsequent events, adjusting the financial statements for matters that's become known after the date of the auditors as addressed in paragraphs 11, 12, 13, 15, and 16 is not rare. It happens in Germany, and from what I gather, in many other jurisdictions more than just rarely. For this reason, I believe that the content of these paragraphs ought to be included in the LCE standard. Then my next comment refers to 8.6.2. For public interest reasons, I strongly disagree with the explanatory material below 8.6.2, which also leads to explanatory material overriding a requirement. The point of written representations is not to clarify the responsibilities of management, which may be set forth in law or regulation, but to have management represent to the auditor that they have actually fulfilled those responsibilities in relation to the particular financial statements. that the auditor has audited prior to the auditor dating the auditor's report. This is different from the second sentence in paragraph 15 of ISA 580, which allows some contents of the written representations to be fulfilled by written public statements. This sentence should therefore either be deleted or the requirement of the second sentence of paragraph 15 of ISA 580 included here, or both. And my last comment refers to 8.65 little c. This requirement is considerably weaker than that in paragraph 20 of ISA 580, which does not allow the auditor to give other than disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements if the requested written representations required by paragraphs 10 and 11 of ISA 580 are not obtained. This weakening would permit auditors to issue an audit opinion even though they have not obtained these written representations, which I believe would not be in the public interest. Consequently, in my view, the contents of paragraph 20 of ISA 580 need to be included here. That's all. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Diane?
Thanks, Tom. And my comment, and we did provide some ones, but the one I wanted to pull out was what Kioe just mentioned, which is 8.6.5c. And I agree absolutely that the language as it was written was weak. And I think the reason I want to pull this one out is I think it's a really good example of guidance to help the practitioner understand modifications to an unqualified opinion. I think we gave some comments just about reporting in general. There's a lot of information in the ISAs about what to do in what circumstance and what type of opinion gets issued. And I think overall, this is an area that needs to be revisited to make sure it's crystal clear. If the spirit and the direction of this LCE standard is that it is truly standalone, then it needs to provide the auditors with direction on how to respond when things don't go as planned and what type of opinion is appropriate in certain circumstances. And this is a perfect example, this comment, where if we don't tighten it up, the auditor isn't going to know you're required to disclaim an opinion. And this is really an important example that just highlights the need that I would ask the task force to go back and look at, is all those circumstances that lead to something other than a clean opinion. Is it crystal clear to the practitioner when to use those alternative opinions and the kind of cause and effect? I would just ask folks to revisit that. Thank you.
Thank you. Edda.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I think my key concern here was raised by Kai-Uwe, and those are the procedures that the auditor needs to do in respect of the subsequent events. So when something is discovered after the auditor's report has been issued, and I agree with Kai-Uwe, those circumstances, in my experience, are not necessarily rarer for an LCE in comparison to other entities, and at the moment the auditor is left without guidance other than it being mentioned here, and it has a trickle-on effect on the documentation as well. So some inconsistencies as a result of it. The more detailed comments I've shared with the task force, but that was my key concern with respect to this section. Thank you.
Okay. Lynn.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Kai. I only have one comment. Generally, I was comfortable with this section, but I wasn't comfortable with 8.9.3 the blue box material on that particular section reads to me like a requirement, and as it can, the retention period for audit files can vary significantly. My suggestion is it is deleted or expanded to put it in context. Thanks very much.
Okay, Len.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm just coming here to support what Josephine said on 8.7.1. I think in this section, we kind of add complexity into it. I think if we stay true to ISO 220 paragraph 40, I think those are very concise and principle based. I think actually it works into the LCE environment. I'm saying that is we're going to be getting a lot of comments in the ED process if we are not consistent with 220. So this both saves the commenters the time, also the task force time to address those comments. So supporting what Josephine has said earlier, but particularly look at paragraph 40 of 220. Thanks.
Okay. Number of comments about consistency with the requirements. I'm in ICE's in both directions here. There was one comment that Imran suggested as well. I don't know whether we need feedback on it, about something that was in the guidance blue boxes that could be a requirement. I don't know, Bev, if you need people to come back to you or on that topic as well.
Yeah, it'll be helpful. It's paragraph 8.5.1 in the blue box. There's a sentence at the bottom. So this is just sort of another reminder to think about when you're sort of getting towards the end of the audit about whether you need to think about whether you're in the right standard or not. So we've got the requirements in part 4, which is when you do when the engagement acceptance and continuance happens, and there's a documentation requirement. With the auditor then does their planning, they do all the risk assessments, and it's at that point, as they gather all of that information, that initial assessment may not be correct. So that's why we sort of have that stand back at the end of part 6 with the documentation requirements. You hope at that point that the auditor will really know that they're in the standard, but we do recognize that something could come up during the rest of the audit as they start to respond. It would be less likely, and that's why we had it as EEM as they're going through. But in any thoughts about whether this should be elevated to a requirement, to sort of have a second stand back at some point, and is this the point that you would want that second stand back? So some views on that will be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So again, the sentence says the auditor may also consider whether such information changes the auditor's determination about the appropriateness of use of the ISA for LCE for the audit. Would people think that it should stay in as guidance, or thinks it should be a good stand back in the requirements? Ada?
I tend to agree with Imran that this is something that needs to be considered at this point in time as a requirement, and probably also included in the documentation.
Okay. Wendy?
So I had a different comment when I sent in my non-fatal flaws, and that was in the box starting in the concluding section. I thought there should be another bullet point for this stand back, but I'm also happy to have it, as we're having this discussion now, included as a requirement in 8.5.1.
Would the general view of the board ask the task force to consider this as a potential requirement? I think I get a nod, at least for the task force to consider it. People think it may be useful. Sue?
So I'm just reflecting on where this project started from, and the desire for something for really less complex entities. And I'm just wondering whether if we have to have 2 standbacks, whether maybe there's an element of overcomplicating things, and perhaps we're trying to cater for situations that are not as less complex as we might have originally started from. So I'm very supportive of the the task force reviewing it, but I suppose that's just what's going through my head is are we over engineering by building in several points where we want the auditor to reflect.
It's a good caution. Should I leave Bev and Kai? I think you have the basic suggestion that people in principle are sympathetic, with the caution that Sue gave that, is 2 standbacks overkill? Are we dealing with a smaller range of circumstances than people expect? I see Edo coming up. It would not be surprising to me that he feels this pretty strongly on this point, and Josephine come in at it. But I'll let you speak for yourselves, Edo and Josephine.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And I think you probably need to see my desire for a requirement here in light of my overarching concerns that I had with the authority and the scope, and that I am afraid that based on how it's phrased now, that the scope or that the standard will be used more widely than what I had in mind. And if it's indeed all these basic and very less complex entities, yes, I agree with Sue, then you wouldn't have this issue. But if the scope leaves room for judgment interpretation, which may not be consistently applied, then I would want some safeguards. So I think that's where my comment comes from.
Yeah, thank you. Just to echo that, I do think that these particular guardrails are really, really important here, and I know we're going to talk about the EM, but as well as some clear guidance on transitional arrangements as well. But I don't need to add much more to what Edo's already said. Thank you.
Sorry, for those who are border on being concerned that too many entities will be scoped in, these guardrails seem to be more important to them. I'm not dismissing them. It wasn't a dismissive statement, but I see the standbacks being useful in that category for them. Eric?
Yeah, I'm sort of reserving judgment until I see the work that's done on the transition material. I mean, it just seems to me that there's going to be potentially so many of these electric wires that you're going to trip over as you go through the engagement that it's going to put people off before they even get into it. If I'm going to have to keep considering this all the way through the engagement, I'm not sure that I even want to do this. So I think it's very careful to have an appropriate balance to help people get into the standard and know when they have to go out. But I'm just a bit scared that there's so much here that it's going to be an inhibitor.
Okay, let's leave it at that with the task force for consideration. I understand the thrust of it, but for many, this is highly linked to the authority question. Those who are concerned about the breadth of the authority and concerned about the transition provisions, these standbacks are important. Of course, transition provisions and movement on authority may lessen the need for it when you start considering the other factors that Eric and Sue have. I really think there's so much nuance and complexity here that the task force needs to come back, bring it to the board, see if people are generally accepting of the balance of all these issues, but I think we got a sense that they're all interconnected for the board. For some people, it's more salient than others too. Is that a fair representation? Edo, did I categorize that you're part of it because you feel strongly? Josephine is okay. I think we'll leave it at that for that topic. Kai, Morten, anything you want to say on part 8?
No, I think we received consistency on some themes coming through. I think in both this part and in part 9, we're somewhat struggling with the amount of detail to bring back. I think, as Diane alluded to, specific situations and how that should be addressed in the auditor's report. It's both really related to part 8 and 9. I think discussion we had both with the board and with the task force from the beginning, I think we discussed multiple different approaches to how this could be done. I think at one point we said, oh, but should we just copy in all the requirements from the ISA, because in order to cover off every situation, that indeed is what we need to do to cover off all those situations. So I think the discussion, though, there are things we can bring back in, and we will look further at that. But we need to see and strike the balance between areas to be brought back in and not providing too much and not providing too little. So I think one of the approaches we discussed at an earlier meeting to have a supplemental guide on auditors reporting that could deal with some of this. And I think that at that point, some of the discussion or feedback we got was that we needed to have all those requirements back in the standard. But is it an option that some of this could be dealt with in a supplemental guide relating to auditors reporting as well, or is that completely off the table? I think maybe one of the options that we could discuss, because if we are to bring all the details back into this standard, I think that part 8 and 9 will grow quite dramatically, and that they could be much larger than the other parts in length as such. So maybe you get some further direction there.
Isabel.
Yes, thank you. We faced the same issue when we developed an auditing standard for small entities, because there's a monetary threshold in France. And we quickly realized that if we wanted to bring all the specificities of reporting, qualifications, emphasis of matter, adverse opinion, and all the nice detail we have in the full standards, it will be as long as the other development in the standard for small entities. So what we did in France, we decided to have a standard for small entities that is standalone, except for reporting. And for reporting, we have a reference to the full standard. That's the best we could do at that time. So maybe that's also something we could consider. Thank you.
Okay. Diane?
Yeah, that was my suggestion. I just thought, could we do some sort of hybrid method and be crystal clear that it's standalone except for matters of reporting, go see the ISA 700. And so that just, maybe we could consider that. I don't know if that is palatable to folks or if that just creates more confusion, but that was our thought.
Any other reactions? Kai?
I do think some of the discussions we had earlier, we said that we needed to be fully standalone. We need to cover off all the issues and requirements specific in this standard. And that's also why we tried to do this, but it is maybe more related to part 9 than on part 8, but they are closely related.
Yep.
So
yeah. Okay. Effectively, honestly, we just have to, if that was the way we go, and I think it's a question about whether we deal with it in part 9, is you'd have to actually just copy the standard and put it in. I don't see how you could have a standalone standard and separate, but let's discuss whether we need to do this as part 9. First of all, I want to ask our European and South African colleagues, it's late hours, it's been a long day. Are we ready to go to part 9 yet? Are you willing to do it, or should we hold off till tomorrow? If you prefer, we have an hour reserved tomorrow. You probably have a sense of the discussion you want to raise for part 9 and the appendices, which we need to get through in an hour tomorrow. But let me know. Isabel, do you want to do that tomorrow? You had your hand up. Tonight? Imran, tonight or tomorrow? Tonight. We're going for it. Yay. Okay. So cool. Incentives. The Europeans and South Africans are a hardy bunch on our board.
yeah, I think with that, then if we flip the slide, we can start moving on to part 9. I think as I previously started a bit on as a follow-up on some of the comments we received on part 8, the comments in this area relates to whether or not we have completeness in respect to different situations that has been brought up and how they're to be dealt with in the auditor's report. And also some of the specific wording that we have brought in, so we may be a bit stricter than what's in the ISOs on the ordering, for example. So no specific items to be brought up from me in the beginning other than that. So I think Tom, I could hand back to you to get comments on the forming in a part 9, forming an opinion and reporting.
Okay, we've already sort of started, began the discussion on this, and the complexity of this topic already is coming out. Anyone like to start us off? Continue the discussion. I don't know, Vili, whether you have a perspective you want to share on some of where we started, because I don't want to derail the discussion on 9, but we started going on a track already. Maybe some context would be helpful.
Sorry, Tom, just context in terms of?
On the auditor reported, you sent me a note. Was it on something else?
No, yeah, I think it was on something else, Tom.
Okay.
I think we can just take the boards.
Okay, Isabel, you were first then.
Yes, thank you. So in addition to what I just previously shared with you regarding our experience in drafting a standard for smaller entity in France and the reference we made to the full standard, I struggled in the current draft we have with what is required in reporting on over information. In paragraph 9.4.1, there is no section on over information, but this is fine because there's a section in 9.8 which says the auditor shall read the over information and so on and report in accordance with the standard. So here we find the reporting in 9.8. Then I searched for something more and what I went to the report examples, but the 2 report examples that are provided are examples of audit where there is no over information. So obviously there was no section on over information. So I think either we miss the wording that we have to include on other information when there is other information. And then we need to include an example with a section on other information. Or I should understand that when we read the other information and we are satisfied, we are not reporting. Because we say that we report when there's a material inconsistency or a misstatement. But if we have nothing to report, I can't find in the standard what we're expected to do. So if it's this hypothesis, it means that we are back to the old 720, where we just report inconsistencies and misstatement. So I wanted to know what the task force had in mind, and if we are expected to report something when we have read the other information and we have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Josephine.
Thank you. I mean, I have obviously sent comments to individual paragraphs, but I just have a general concern that the requirements are not being captured here because of the illustrative report. And as others have said before, I think it's a standalone standard. We can't assume that the ISA is available to look at the more detail. And also, if we're not being more I can't think of the right word right now, but if we don't include those requirements, then we're not going to have consistent reports, because not everybody necessarily wants to follow the illustrative audit report word for word. I mean, potentially you could make, it's not a great idea, but potentially you could make the illustrative report required, but then that doesn't give much flexibility to the practitioner. But I really feel like whilst this is going to make the standard much longer, there's such important information that's required to be included in the auditor's report, and it's missing. So I do feel that that needs to come back in here. I have similar comments on the other matter paragraphs and around the ISA 710 as well. There's some I think summaries that have happened, which were quite a good attempt to summarize information, but then it got just slightly confusing. So some work, I think, is really needed in this area. That was all I wanted to make. That's the only point I wanted to make at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Kaioi?
Tom, thanks. I have some comments. The first one is referring to paragraph 9.41. A little I, this paragraph is referring to the responsibilities of managements for financial statements. And my comment is, missing here is management responsibility for internal control as described in the example auditor's report in the appendix and in ISA 700, which is a fundamental premise of an audit and therefore, in my view, in public interest. Then my second comment refers to the next paragraph, to little g, and the first comment refers to little I, the objectives of the auditor. My comment is, but not stating the words to be used like in ISA 700, auditors may deviate substantially from the words used in the examples auditor's report. This will reduce the uniformity of reports, which is also, in my view, not in the public interest. And my last comment in this paragraph, which refers to the matters communicated with those charged with governance. My comment is, but not including the contents of paragraphs 41 and 42 of ISA 700, you are eliminating the ability of auditors of LCEs to use these options to refer to an appendix or a website. In my jurisdiction, it is primarily auditors of LCEs that use the option in paragraph 41, little c, of ISA 700. It seems to me that the contents of these paragraphs should be included here so that LCE auditors have these options too. Then my next comment refers to 9.5.1, and there to little a. I have a comment to little a, and there a little triple I. My comment is ISA 570 actually permits the use of an adverse opinion in these circumstances. Why are we limiting the opinion to a qualified one? This is my question. Then my next comment refers to little c. The contents of paragraph 15 of ISA 705 needs to be included here to prevent auditors from issuing piecemeal opinions which would not be in the public interest. Then my next comment refers to paragraph 9.58 little c. Here my comment is, it seems to me to be in the public interest that the contents in ISA 705 of paragraphs 21, 22, 23 need to be included here, or auditors would not be required to do this and won't. And then my last comment refers to paragraph 9.5.12. First comment is for the title disclaimer of opinion. My comment is for both adverse and disclaimers of opinion. There needs to be a requirement in line with ISA 705 paragraph 27 that requires other modifications to be included. It is in the public interest that users of the report become aware of all modifications. And then in the same paragraph, I have my last comment to little d. Missing here is that the auditor no longer refers to 9.4.1 little f and little h, and no longer includes little I, ISA 705 paragraph 26. It is not clear to me whether the requirement in ISA 705 paragraph 28 has been fulfilled. I think that's all. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I give back to you.
Thank you very much, Kai. Eric.
Thanks, Tom. So my overarching thought would be that the section 9 should cover, quotes, all the requirements we need to have to cover the broad spectrum of reporting responsibilities. And I acknowledge that that sounds like it's getting very, very long. But I think a lot of, I think when it comes to illustrative reports and so forth, I think that can be done through non-authoritative guidance to really bring out and explain how the requirements actually work in practice. So I think that's the direction that the task force was intending to go, and I'm supportive of that direction. The one thing that, you know, within what's been what's in front of me now is just in the sort of basic report, the sort of standard report, if you will. You know, I think we should err on the side of driving consistency as opposed to flexibility, and be err on the side of consistency with the ISAs in terms of the form and the structure of the report. I truly believe that if it's a reasonable assurance opinion, it should look like a reasonable assurance opinion the way we intend it. So I think on some of the requirements where we have wording like including, stating, or describing, I think we have to be more specific around what we actually want the auditor to say, as opposed to giving options for the auditor to play around with those words. I think that would be not in the public interest. So that's kind of my high-level perspective on this section, recognizing that there's a lot of reporting requirements out there. How to bring those in without overwhelming the standard, I recognize is a big challenge. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Two more, Yash.
Thank you, Tom. I have two comments. First one is mentioned by Kai Wei. According to the paragraph 9.5.1, small a, 3, the qualified opinion shall be expressed when it is appropriate to prepare financial statements on going concern basis, but the material uncertainty exists and the uncertainty disclosure is not appropriate. However, in this case, an adverse opinion may be expressed. Therefore, appropriate provisions should be made in these LCE standards, specifically referring to ISA 570 paragraph 23, paragraph 9.6.7 is consistent with the description in 570 paragraph 23, whereas both paragraph 9.5.1a3 and paragraph 9.6.7 are not consistent. The second one is 9.5.1b2, provide that the adverse opinion shall be expressed when it is not appropriate to prepare financial statements on going concern basis. In such case, it should be provided clearly with causality that although it is not appropriate to prepare financial statements on going concern basis, the financial statements are prepared on going concern basis. In particular, referring ISA 570 paragraph 21, paragraph 6.7 and 9.6.6 is consistent with 570 paragraph 21, but both paragraphs 9.5.1b3 and 9.6.6 are not consistent. Very complex. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Diane?
Yeah, and this is just in the spirit of maybe just giving some thought to this section. You know, I wonder if there's an opportunity to build out a little bit of the chart that you have in 9.5. You know, if there's another way that you can try and condense this down a bit to build out either a decision tree or a chart of some sort to help the auditor understand, do you have this situation? This is the impact of your opinion. Here are the required elements. And then, as Eric mentioned, to the extent you can provide examples, I think that might be a way to bridge this without adding a tremendous amount of bulk. But I do think this is a tough one because it also has to be clear. And I think, you know, sometimes the practitioner will get confused as to where they are in all these words and what exactly they have. So it's going to be tricky to come up with the right words to be crystal clear as to what you're talking about, but yet not make it so overwhelming to the practitioner. But maybe there's an opportunity for chart or some sort of decision tree, which might be helpful in this section.
Thank you. Isabel?
Thinking further and listening to everybody, I cannot recall having seen comments from SMP auditing LCE complaining about the complexity of reporting on LCE. Many have complained about the complexity of risk assessment, of documentation, of some specific standards, but I cannot recall having heard comments. That's the reporting part that is a burden. So maybe it's something to think further in what we decide to do next. Thank you.
Okay. So as I would say, there was a lot of comments about requirements that should be brought in. Some going to the extreme would be in reference to the full standard itself. There's some comments around illustrative examples. I also know that the task force has received a lot of helpful suggestions and language that could address some of these comments. And I think to some extent they have to weigh all the pros and cons of the different approaches. Additional guidance could be one element, like Eric had mentioned as well. I personally feel strongly about the standalone nature of this standard. So I would regret if we violate that principle in the long term, but I think the task force will have to grapple with it. Anyone like to add any other perspective before I turn it to Kai? Philly?
Yes, Tom. I think we have received a lot of detailed comments on this part, and obviously the task force will have a look at this, and I think we can come back with a few options. And thank you, the board has also shared a few options. I do think, the other thing we need to remember is that just referring back to this to 700 and 705 and maybe 706, there could be an unintended consequences trap there, because just remember those standards are written as an integral part of the full set of ISAs. And our standard, the ISA for LCEs, is structured completely different. So if you suddenly take someone into those standards, they have to deal with a standard that has been structured differently. The 700 and 705 has requirements, it's got application material. So just thinking about this on the spot is that it could actually result in a lot of confusion about how do you deal with that standard that now has requirements and application material compared to this ISA for LCE that has not been set up in that way. I know we probably think about the IFRS for S&Es that in some places takes you back to the IFRS as the full IFRS, but remember that is a little bit different, where you have a standard that deals discretely with recognizing, measuring, and disclosing a specific item, where our standards deals with a process of getting to an output. So I'm not completely shifting that off, but I'm just saying that there's probably a few things that we need to think through. And then obviously, Tom, the point that you've made is again the desire to really have this as a separate standard without the need to go back to the ISAs. But let's have a look at the detailed comments. Maybe we can come back with something that is more palatable and maybe a few options.
Okay, is the board amenable to that path on auditor reporting? I'm not committing anyone to any action yet. I think the task force knows that they have a number of comments to grapple with right now. Is that fair to say, Kai?
That is correct. I think part 9 probably is one of the areas where we have the most comments and most detailed comments to deal with. So I think the summary is correct. We will need to go back and look at the detailed comments as the task force come up with a suggestion on how to solve the issue. I do think, though, that some of the discussion that we just had has been helpful to see what we have to deal with and what are the possible options. So given the discussions we had earlier on the being a fully separate standard, I think that is being reiterated through some of this discussion as well. So as I said, we will look at the detailed comments with the task force tomorrow and Wednesday, I guess.
Okay. Speaking of tomorrow, I think we should leave. We've touched on some of the appendices right now, particularly in relation to this topic, but I think we'll finish the appendices tomorrow. I think an hour should be more than sufficient for that. And then we'll turn to fraud. So I assume the LCE discussion will take less than the hour at this point, but that will be our plan, is to use some of that time tomorrow. Is that fine, Kai and Bev? And okay. Anything anyone else would like to add on the SME comment? Also, we have the preface and the conforming amendment still, so I'm not forgetting those. So not just appendice, preface, conforming amendment. So hour-ish may be about right for tomorrow. Anything anyone wants to add? Okay, really robust discussion. We spoke about unintended consequences just a second ago. One unintended consequence of staying on so late for our friends in the UK is that we have a birthday boy on the call, Jamie Shannon. Sorry to start your birthday with a late night or early morning call, Jamie, but we wish you all the best and for an improvement going into tomorrow as you wake up, and it's real, hopefully get to celebrate your birthday a little bit, and with, at least you're with friends here, we could say that, and we appreciate all you do. So Jamie, happy birthday to you. And wish everyone else a good rest of the day, or a good start to the day if you're just beginning again, and get some rest, and we'll see you tomorrow. Great discussion. Thank you so much to the task force for setting up a great days of discussions. Tomorrow, LCE again, and then fraud. Speak to you soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.